This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. Join me as I talk to women entrepreneurs about the nuts and bolts of their journeys and to experts who will give you insights that are hard to find anywhere else. Let's jump in. How do you banish the fear and dread you feel when you're pitching investors? What's the one mental switch you can make to instantly gain power and confidence when pitching? How can you use your knowledge of the human brain and the investor mindset to make your pitch that much more compelling? In this episode, entrepreneur and founder Allison Byers talks about the key mindset shifts you need to increase your odds of getting funded, how you can equalize the power balance when you're seeking capital, how to avoid the hidden pitfalls that lurk unseen in every investor conversation, and much more. Now, here's Allison. Hey, good afternoon, Allison. Welcome to the Invisible Inc. show.
Thank you for having me. Excited to chat today.
We're really excited to have you on here as well. So we'll jump right in. You've had a pretty interesting journey. You were a founder yourself. You raised a meaningful amount of money. And now you're a founder who helps other founders. What has that journey been like?
It's been quite a journey for quite a while. So my background is I was a tech operator for about 15 years. And then my foray into entrepreneurship was with my last company. So I helped launch and co-ran a medical device startup that we spun out of MIT and a hospital system here in the Boston area where I am. And I was the business one on the team and did our fundraising. Raised almost 10 million over the course of 5 years, and then that company was acquired. For me, what really stood out and defined the experience was the gender bias that I encountered while fundraising and in that process. I'm very used to gender bias, having been a female tech operator, very used to being the only one in the room. This was different. It was a very different feeling and a very different experience. And so when that company was acquired, I spent a lot of time researching the space of pitching and the space of fundraising, really to understand if what I went through was typical or not. I didn't even know if that was a normal experience. And you very quickly find out statistics like 2% of VC dollars go to women, 1.6% go to Black founders. I think it's 0.6% go to Black women founders, all indicators of a true systemic issue in a way that you almost don't see anywhere else in any other industry to that extreme. And so for me, that was a catalyst for wanting to do something, right? Wanting to do something meaningful in this space because it needed innovation from outside. When you're at that extreme, the innovation isn't going to come from inside of a system that perpetuates that type of bias. So that's what led me to found my current company, Scroobious, which I did right when the pandemic started, one month before COVID showed up, which is a whole other thing to talk about. But yeah, now our focus really is on helping founders, primarily those who have been historically blocked from accessing investor networks or identify as underrepresented in some way in the space of fundraising and entrepreneurship, learn how investors think and create pitch material that is investable and compelling. And we do this through a scalable platform so that it is widely accessible and affordable, which that type of education and guidance today is really not affordable for most entrepreneurs.
And that's pretty inspiring. I want to touch on one thing to the extent you're comfortable talking about it that you mentioned in terms of the overt discrimination, the gender issues that you saw during the pitching process. Would you care to maybe give us a little bit of a taste, some texture, some examples of what that felt like?
Yeah, I mean, this manifests in so many different ways. And, I can share some of what I went through. We've worked with over 350 founders now at Scroobious, and we've heard unbelievable stories. Most of our founders have gone through just a huge range of this type of bias in different ways based on their category of underrepresentation. For me, there were some instances that were pretty overt. There were some that were not as much, but still very clearly impacting my ability to raise. So one example that most women who are fundraising have experienced is going into a pitch meeting with male colleagues and having the fund manager really only address the male colleagues and not you, right? And I experienced that a lot of questions directed at the CFO when I should be the one fielding those questions. And it just diminishes your authority, and you're clearly not perceived as the person running the company, which really damages your ability to raise. Another one that I did not know at the time when I was raising for my last company, but now having done all of the research in this field that I've done for Scroobious, I realized that I was asked a lot of prevention-oriented questions. So this is research by, I know this is a podcast, people can't see us, but you're smiling in instant recognition, by Dana Cons, who gave a fantastic TED Talk, and her research is outstanding, in recognizing that women tend to get asked prevention-oriented questions. So things like, how are you going to mitigate this risk? And how are you going to defend yourself? And putting you in that negative position, versus the promotion questions that they ask men, like, oh, tell me about all the upside. How do you grow? The positive aspects. And I was repeatedly put on the defense. And I answered as such for that last company, right? It creates a negative tone to the meeting versus one of excitement about opportunity. Now I know to recognize those and turn them around and answer them in a promotion way, but I didn't at the time. So that one's a more subtle gender bias, but equally harms your ability to raise.
And those resonate so much just across yourself and other women we've talked to at Invisible Inc. as well. So you talked about having done the research on the pitch process and all the challenges that women face. So what gave you the exact idea? How did you, what does Scroobious do? Let's start with that and then maybe go into how you came up with the product design.
So I started doing a lot of secondary research into, well, what does a typical pitch deck look like? Or what are the investors saying that they're looking for? Because for me, part of our ability to raise is I am good at pitching. I am good at presenting. I have consulting background and the operator background. This is a natural skill for me. So that served us well. But for many, it's not, right? This is a not natural skill, and it's very uncomfortable to put together this kind of presentation. And one of the things I noticed was there are a ton of pitch frameworks out there, and there's no one accepted framework. Every investor is shooting out tons of different advice, particularly if you're Googling or using Twitter for these founders that are trying to educate themselves. There's so much noise, and it's really hard to find the good signal in that noise. So instantly I thought, well, if there was a framework that was validated with investor input, that if this content was in there, it would satisfy most people, that they're looking for this content, first of all. And then what is a narrative? So how can you order those sections or that content so it tends to work well? It tends to be in a compelling order. That's just where we started. So I also did 100 investor interviews with a mix of angels and funds spread over all geographies to get at that, and constantly testing, hey, if it was this content in this order, how would you feel about that? What about this? What about that, right? Constantly refining so that we could get it to a product type place and we could be giving advice that's validated. So the content in the platform that we offer is everything from what even is a pitch deck, all the way through exactly the sections you need to include, how you organize information on a slide so that it's easy to understand, all those principles, through how do you present it in the form of little micro lessons, because that's also what I discovered, is a very effective way for most people to learn, is through those micro lessons. So it's about enabling founders to learn how to do this through asynchronous online access to accessible, validated material. And then we also pair it with some specific points of personalized feedback from reviewers that we train, because that was the other thing I heard from founders very clearly was I still want someone to look at my things. I still want someone to tell me if I'm on the right track, right? As much as I can enable myself. So we do that. And then a whole ton of community building and workshops and curation with meetings with investors and all the kind of things, and meetings founder to founder and practices and the stuff that will build something that's very supportive.
So how long did this whole process take you from the time you started doing the secondary research till the day you rolled out something that a founder could sign up for online?
Yeah, that was an interesting process too, because I talk about this a lot also. I incorporated a month before COVID, and I have 2 kids, and all of a sudden there was a year and a half where they had no school to go to. right? And that was for parents in this pandemic and working parents, that was a very different experience than what other people had, and particularly of school age children. And so I made a very conscious decision when that happened to take a slow, measured approach to building out this product so that it could survive through that period of uncertainty rather than having to shut the company down by trying to still grow really fast. So, what it did was afford me the time to very thoroughly and methodically test the content. And our first product was a Google Doc that followed this curriculum I had made. And I tested, well, if I gave someone this content and then I gave them the feedback when I think they should have it, will that work? Right? Just the concept of it. You don't need to build a tech platform. I talk about this a lot with tech founders. You can do a whole lot of validation without spending really any money with the tools that we have today. And we got someone into the Mass Challenge Accelerator just on a Google Doc, right? And I thought, okay, there's something here. And I really, believe a lot of it is that work we did into the content and understanding how you teach somebody the why behind the advice. That's what's missing from a lot of education out there is why does this matter? And when you teach someone that, they're more able to create compelling material because they get why it's important versus someone just telling them to do something that they don't think is important. So we had that Google Doc for a few months, and we kept getting people using it successfully along with kind of that paired feedback from me. And then we took it another step and I said, okay, this isn't really tenable anymore. And I turned it into a bunch of landing pages using, a website maker that I could make as a non-technical founder. And we had that for a few months. And then that was starting to break because more people were using it. And so we created a low code version on Bubble of our software to test that out. And that lasted a few months, right? And then we hit the limits there. Now we have a custom software. We launched less than a year ago, our custom software platform. So it's been iterating over a few years.
I just love how you develop essentially from a matchstick and rubber band model all the way to something that can stand alone on its own legs. That's awesome. And what does the price point look like? Like if I'm a founder that's trying to come in and make this an affordable answer, what am I looking at in terms of an investment?
So we have iterated that a little bit too, based on our community, because we've now worked with over 350 founders in basically a couple years. And we learned that people come to us with different stages of needs. So we have a few different levels of an annual membership. So we have just join our community without the whole pitch education piece. If you want access to our workshops and our resources and our perks and all of our community, our founders are all in a community together. That's only $120 for a year. We wanted to make it like super, super accessible, right? Be part of a supportive network. And then we have our middle range, which has access to all the education and what we call our Pitch It plan or our PIP. And that is $240 for the year. So again, super, super affordable for the value that you're getting. And then our highest level includes 3 points of that personalized feedback. So founders can upload a draft of their deck 2 times and get each time a round of very actionable comments, so written feedback. Asynchronous, which is how we keep it scalable and affordable, and then 1 hour Zoom session. And that is $480, again, for a whole year, and all 3 points of that, including that hour session, which is not anything you can find elsewhere. And it was very deliberate. I've been a pitch coach. It's $5,000 on average because it's time-based. It's somebody's time. And by making it as scalable as we can and enable people to get as far as they can, we can keep it at a price that really is affordable.
I'm excited about it. Looking at the process holistically, and having coached all these 350 founders, as well as your work as a pitch coach prior, what are some of the high-level observations you can make about women founders and maybe underrepresented women founders in particular? It would be good for us to take to heart.
I mean, the biggest one, that we see all the time and that I experienced, and, it took me going through that 5 years to come to a different place of being, is founders who identify as underrepresented, in particular women and founders of color, tend to think that we are lesser than the investor that we're pitching. So we go into meetings with the attitude of, I need your money and you know better than me. We kind of acquiesce to whatever it is the investor is saying. That puts you already at a disadvantage in a system where we're already experiencing every disadvantage. We're doing it to ourselves. Investors don't make money without investing, right? So it's a shift in your mental framework, in your approach to these meetings of, hey, I'm building something that's going to make a lot of money, right? And if you don't believe that in your heart, you should take a step back and evaluate what you're doing. You have to believe that. And you're going into a pitch offering an investor to profit off of what you're building. You're inviting them into your opportunity, right? That's a chance for them to profit off of you. And you're equals in this conversation. You're not going in looking for a donation. You're not charity. And it really can take a while, and you need to have that network of other people supporting that construct in your head of, hey, when I get a no, fine. Or if somebody doesn't see what I'm doing and it turns into like an argument kind of conversation, fine. We're not a good match. That's okay. I'm going to go talk to some other people.
And is there like a mental switch that you see that's helpful in flipping that mentality? Because I've had this conversation with quite a few people and I can totally relate to it.
A lot of it is bringing some transparency into how investors evaluate opportunities and understanding the feedback that you're getting from investors and how to interpret it. The other thing that makes this such a hard industry, and I call it an industry, fundraising itself is an industry. It just hasn't really been looked at that way, but it is. And in that ecosystem, investors are not incentivized to give honest feedback to founders. It's not in their best interest, right? From the investor standpoint, even if you would normally just say no, right? In your head, you say, oh, this isn't for me. There's always that thing that says, well, what if one day you do make it big or you surprise me and I was wrong? I want the chance to get back in. So I have to keep a friendly relationship with you. And if you give honest feedback, which is what the founder needs, there's the fear that you're going to hit someone the wrong way with that feedback and they're not going to invite you later or they're not going to be receptive to future communication from you. So instead, founders get things like, oh, it's a little too early, or let's talk again when you have some more traction. It's not true. It's not the honest feedback. But if you're a founder first time going through this and you don't have a big network of other founders or investors, you don't know that. And then you question yourself, right? And you start questioning, well, am I doing the wrong thing? What do I need to change? This might not be right. And instead, if you do get that education and you enter a network where people teach you how to interpret this, you can start changing that construct, right? Because then you know in your head, oh, they should have just said no. We're just not the right match. It's not that I'm doing something wrong. They just don't get it. And so I should go approach a different type of investor.
And that makes a lot of sense. But what if, I'm going to push you on this a bit, but what if, let's say, my business model is simply not up to snuff? So it's not as if I came to you and there's an industry mismatch or a stage mismatch. You know, you're not early stage, I'm early stage, whatever the case. It's not the issue, but the intrinsics aren't good enough. How do I get to that as a founder to make sure that that's not the core issue that's making me uninvestable?
Yeah, and that's where you have to have people. You have to either, work with someone like us, work with a party that will give you that feedback and help you understand that, or have advisors or connect with other founders. You have to be able to share what you're doing in a safe space and get that direct feedback. Right. So if we get a deck where the business model slide isn't clear or they don't clearly communicate how they're going to generate revenue or it doesn't make sense, we give that feedback, right? We say that directly in our comments. This is not a clear business model. It doesn't seem investable because I don't understand how you're generating revenue. Or, an investor is going to push you here. Is this a realistic source of your primary revenue? All of those kinds of things. You can't do it in a vacuum, right? You can't do it if you don't know what you don't know or you don't know better. And you can't do it if you're only pitching investors who are not giving you direct feedback. You have to have that other source. And you can modify it. It's not like you can't change your business model. And so if you get the feedback that it's not an investable business model, you can do something about it. You can either say, okay, let's think of new ones, or maybe equity funding is not the right way to capitalize your business. If that's what you want your business model to be, then let's think about other ways to get this going.
But the economics has to still work, right? Regardless of how you fund it, it still has to make money, which
you still have to be able to operate with a profit, or you're not long for business.
Awesome. You kind of started to hit on it a bit already. How do you, within Scroobious, help with the pitch support? Right? I started looking at some of the great videos you have on YouTube. You talk through, the NASDAQ Entrepreneurial Center. I love the videos, so I'll plug them right here. They're very good uses of time. But maybe take a step back, and for those of us who haven't seen them, you have the 10 models. I don't know if you can do a quick walkthrough of the 10 sections of your deck.
Thank you for watching those. And for sure, we put a ton of content out there. I talk about this all the time. I run pitch workshops all the time. And we do have that model of kind of our core 10 sections that should be in the core of your pitch deck. And we cover those in depth. Each one comes with the content, the storytelling element that it provides, and then also the risk that investors are assessing with that section. Those are the two sides of pitching, is you have to tell a story and you have to remove risk with that story. So I look at it in a couple sections, but the top 3 sections, and the way we recommend everybody start their pitch, and you'll get different advice. Again, it's not one size fits all. There's no one authority on how you pitch. But what works really well is to start with your origin story. At the early stage, so if we're talking Series A or earlier, you as founder are critical to the investment decision, because you as founder and CEO are the steward of the capital you're seeking, right? You make the decisions about what to do with that money. So the investor has to not only believe in your business and your idea, they have to believe in you as the person managing their money. And so you have to communicate why you started this company. Why are you doing it? I think as founders, particularly women, we tend to think we shouldn't put ourselves in it. We should keep it business, factual, right? Get ourselves out of it. But you have to put yourself in it. You have to talk about why you decided to do this, because the investor has to understand and believe that when it gets really, really hard, harder than you think it will, you're not going to walk away. Or you're not going to just check out and make poor decisions because it got too hard. And that means that you're in it for more than just the potential of financial gain, right? You're tied to what you're doing in a deeper way. And that is communicated through telling your origin story of why you started this business. So that's first. And the other reason why it works really well, I incorporate a lot of human psychology into our teachings so you can use our brains to your advantage. We all have the same human brain, no matter who we are, is that if you can get somebody to feel an emotion when you're delivering information, it's been shown that they pay more attention to you for a whole 30 minutes after they feel that emotion. And when you tell your origin story, it typically elicits some type of emotion from the person you're talking to. So not only is it important information and a good way to start a story, you're priming the person to pay more attention to you for the whole rest of your pitch. So use our brains. And then after you tell your origin story, you want to get right into the problem. And a very common origin story is that you experience a problem, there was no good solution, and then you go solve it, right? That was my origin story. So it's very natural to go into, and this is a big problem. And then you have to convince the investor there is a big problem for a lot of potential customers where they're experiencing acute pain. So it needs data behind it, right? It's independent even of how you solve it. Just convince someone of that problem that exists. Then you talk about how you're solving it, your solution. And those top 3, the why you're doing it, the problem, and the solution, are tickets to the game. That's why you put them at the top of the deck. All the other sections are about business mechanics and execution, right? But if the investor doesn't understand why you're doing it, if they don't believe there is a real big acute problem out there that people would pay money to solve, and if they don't believe you solve it, nothing else really matters. So that's why we spend the most time there on those top 3.
Do you want to talk a little bit about kind of what to focus on if you're a founder on the business mechanics section? Just some top do's, don'ts that we can keep in mind?
We have the core 10 right up on our website. You can see that model. It's been published. We go in detail, and there's a Business Insider article about each of these sections, kind of our top tips. And that NASDAQ workshop goes into them too. Essentially from there, you need to clearly communicate how you're going to execute on this solution. Well, what is that business model that we talked about? How are you going to make money with that solution? And then your market size. How much money is there the potential to make, right? That one's really important. And in particular, doing a bottom up market size. Again, we have a lot of information out there. One of the things in our platform is we built a workbook to make it really approachable for founders to build that bottom up market size that they download and work in with a whole big lesson. I do a whole workshop just on this. I know it's a challenge area, but that's how investors do their market sizing. And there's math behind it, which determines if something is investable or not. So that's why it's important. It's not just throwing some big number up there. It has to make sense. And then your competitive landscape, how you're going to go to market, which really is your customer acquisition. Why is now the time for your company to exist? And why is now the time for you to be fundraising, which is usually all about your traction and, the chronology of the progress that you've made. It's kind of the classic elements of what you would have in a business plan. It's just people don't really make business plans anymore. They make pitch decks, and you have to communicate it in that way.
And that's a great overview of a really complex topic. So I appreciate your giving us the quick lowdown on it. A couple of questions on that. First is, I wonder if you can drill down on the financial projections, particularly when we're talking about women entrepreneurs. There's a perception, maybe there's some of the reality that women don't feel as comfortable handling the numbers. What has been your experience, and what have you seen work well when it comes to the financial projections part of the pitch deck?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we have our core 10. And then when I do the workshops or in our platform, we talk about optional material. This is stuff that you have to make, but I don't recommend keeping in the core because you don't need it for your first meeting, for a first pitch, which is all about convincing someone you're worth another meeting or you're worth more time. And a lot of it is because of the data and the research I found that, especially for women, if you put your financial projections in your pitch, investors will hang on that slide and they will try to pick it apart and they will really focus on it. And you don't need that to determine whether you're worth another meeting because everyone knows these are made up numbers, right? No one expects at the early stage that your projections are what's going to happen. And this is where founders can get more comfortable. It's not just the numbers. So even if you're not a numbers person or you get uncomfortable or afraid you're going to mess up on a number, what the investor cares about is what's behind the numbers. How do you talk in regular language about what creates these projections? What are the assumptions under them, right? So if you show a big jump in sales from one year to the next, well, how did that happen? Did you hire a bunch of people and you had to spend a lot of money behind it? Or did you bring on a new channel partner? Or did network effects start happening? So when you think about projections, I like to push on those questions because it makes it more real, right? Then there's stuff behind the numbers that you do know how to talk about because it's the decisions you're making about how to run your business. And when you put it on a slide, you save it for the second or the third meeting. And then you talk through it that way. And you pick for yourself and put this on the slide. This is what, is in our program, what we coach people on. What is it that you want people to know about your model? How you came to these numbers? What stands out? For a lot of tech companies, they want to call attention to the gross margin and over time, how big that gross margin gets, right? So call it out. Or maybe for you, you have really low customer acquisition costs and you want that to be noticed. Right? Whatever it is for your model that you want people to know, that's a core driver of it, pull it out, put it on the slide and talk about it in real language so it becomes more tangible. It changes when you get beyond Series A and hopefully you have some sales and data where you should be talking more about the actual cells in your spreadsheet. But the early stage, you built a model, right? It's a model. It's not historical. You're not building off of data that has already happened where you can start predicting. It's all based on assumptions. It's looking at your model. I do think every founder should be hands-on in there. Even if you contract someone to help you, you should be part of the building of it so that you're not just handed a spreadsheet and your eyes glaze over and you say, oh, I have to have you with me to talk about it. Because then that's not instilling confidence in the investor that you know how to operate the business. So you should get in it, you should get comfortable, and you should build in things where you can play around with changing numbers and see what that does to your bottom line so that you do get that deeper understanding of, okay, I know the levers, right? This is a big lever. A small change in this row on this factor makes a big change right below. So I know this is important. And you want to calculate deltas between things. So you can talk not just about the numbers that are going to happen, but what's the change rate so that you know when there's a big jump and you can tie it to something else that's happening in there.
One little question on financials, and I want to come back to another point you made. The only other question on financials is, I heard from a couple of angel investors that there's a 2Z rule or the 3Z rule, I guess, depending on how realistic your top line projections are and then how realistic your cost projections are. Do you have high level comments in terms of what founders should keep in mind while they're building out, or things you've seen women do that or entrepreneurs do that we should be cautious about?
I mean, in general, I try to stay away from giving the like 2Zs or 3Zs or like in general, this budget should be this percent of this because it's different, right? We're industry agnostic on our platform because we focus on communication, not evaluation of a business per se. We have CPG companies, we have deep tech, we have biotech, we have food, we have all over the place.
Yeah, sorry, let me clarify. The 2Z was everything's going to take twice as long, cost twice as much.
Yeah. So, I mean, a few areas that founders can fall into, and a lot of this is in trying to please the investor, right? This is the trap of like, well, I think investors won't take me seriously if I don't have a hockey stick projection, right? Where it just goes very steeply up in your revenue projections. If that's not realistic, or if you can't talk about why that would hockey stick, or if your assumption behind it is just like, well, every month we're going to 5X, right? That's not realistic. And so you're not doing yourself any favors because you're going to have to talk through your model when you get into due diligence if someone's really serious about it. So don't waste everyone's time, including your own, by having fanciful projections that obviously don't make sense when you talk about it. And that's kind of the guiding principle is you always want that gut check, right? You don't want to have something where a lot of times women will do this. We'll be much more conservative in our estimates and our projections, much more realistic, grounded in what do we actually think will happen. And then these are stereotypes, obviously. It's not across the board, but men do tend to have more inflated projections or much more on the upside versus the realism. There's a happy medium where everyone should be, where, if things went well, these are some projections that pass the gut test. And you can have multiple scenarios if you want. You can have a good, medium, and poor if you want to. But really, getting that like Goldilocks of, hey, we're going to expect some upside and some positive. So we think this passes the gut check. That's really what you want to go with.
Awesome. And are you seeing investors adjust for this known tendency of women to undersell both themselves and the potential of their startups? And is that covered in your process?
It's hard. I mean, it really depends on the investor. For the most part, sadly, no. They'll look at your projections and make their own assumptions about what you have in there. And for women, if you do trend toward a more conservative estimate, investors are not going to automatically add to your numbers because they think that you're doing that. Or they might think that you're not aggressive enough as a founder. That could be a conclusion that they make, right? That you're not going to hit sales hard enough. So the onus is on the founder to find that projection range that communicates the upside opportunity, but isn't so fanciful, right? So we do a lot of pitch practice breakfasts where we have great partnerships and we bring together founders from our community and then emerging fund managers where it's a safe, supportive space or practice your pitch, get that real feedback that you need. We were in one where there was a projection that had just a crazy, by year 5, hundreds of millions of revenue, and a fund manager said, I don't even take it seriously. Like, that's just not going to happen, right? And you don't see that. You don't see those numbers in all the pitches that cross your desk. So having some awareness of what your projections look like compared to others that are pitching and what investors are seeing.
One last question on the pitching side, and then I want to move to the investor side. One critical thing you mentioned was de-risking, and I've heard that from several investors now, that what they're looking for is not only that you intelligently understand the risks, but you also intelligently de-risk those risks. Clearly, it depends on which one of those 10 dimensions you're talking about to de-risk. Are there general principles, things that you would outline in terms of what a founder should think about as she's thinking about de-risking her pitch and her overall plan that would be good for someone to keep in mind?
Each of those sections carries risks with it. And so if you watch that NASDAQ talk, for example, I go through what are the risks in each of those sections, right? Or in our platform, there's a whole lot more information about that. But it's an important lens. And that's kind of the why behind a lot of stuff. And that's what founders usually don't get, that type of knowledge or insight without someone teaching them. That is, investors do come at things from the negative. You're not only up against others in your space, your competition that they might see, you're up against every opportunity, even ones that have nothing to do with your industry, on your risk level. Because every investor has their own appetite for how de-risked they need something to be, where they feel like it's a good bet, right? It's always a risk to early stage invest. And you try to remove as much of that risk as you can. So you justify, if I put my money in, I think there is a decent chance I'm getting more of it out later. We already talked about your origin story, the risk that you're going to walk because you only want to do this to make money and you're not tied to it deeper. Then you're not going to care if it gets hard. You're going to detach. The risk with your problem section is that there's not a real problem, that you don't present data or cited sources that back up the incident rate of whatever's happening, and that it's not acute, right? That maybe it's a dull problem, a dull pain, and people aren't really going to go spend money to solve it, right? That this is what the investor is trying to evaluate. Your solution, the risk is you don't actually solve that problem that you told me about. You solve a slightly different problem and there's a disconnect, and maybe you don't understand your audience in the way that you think that you do. Or your solution just isn't really needed, right? You're kind of making something that I don't think is needed out there, or it doesn't seem realistic that you could build the solution that you're talking about, that it seems untenable. And each of those 10 sections carries different risks. And if you know the risk that the investor is trying to mitigate, you can make your content speak to that risk, right? Then your story is not only telling the narrative of your opportunity, but it's removing the risk. It's de-risking it along the way.
It's like, you don't explicitly call it out, but you answer the unasked question that the investor is playing out in their head that says, well, what's the worst case scenario in each of these? And how is she addressing that so that I feel comfortable enough that I'm not going to be left in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean without a life raft?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the whole concept behind, right? Like with Scroobious, that's what I wanted to do, is teach someone not just here's a template for a deck, fill it in, but why? Why do you have to do these things? For a founder, it's pretty intuitive to make a sales pitch, right? To sell to a customer. You can put yourself in the mindset of your customer and understand their needs. If you can't put yourself in the mindset of an investor because you haven't been one and don't know a lot of people who have, how can you make a compelling pitch? How can you put the stuff in there that does answer the questions in their head? You have to teach someone how they're thinking, so that's what they know they're doing.
So that's a fantastic segue into the investor side. So I know that you also offer investors a platform via Scroobious. So I'd be curious, in terms of your observations as you worked with these investors, what is their appetite for investing, and what are you seeing in terms of both kind of the upsides as people are becoming more aware of investing in women founders, as well as potential blocks or things that are not as encouraging on the investment side?
We haven't launched yet, but we're building an investor-facing side of this so that for all the founders, where we're helping them create their compelling pitch material. And, we work primarily with founders who identify as underrepresented and don't come through normal sourcing methods. We can put them in front of relevant investors, and for the investors, we're data driving the curation so that we're showing them relevant things to them in a really cool, that's a whole other conversation, really cool way. In the meantime, we do everything we can to curate these introductions, do these practice sessions, both virtual and in person, right? And really build that ecosystem. So we have developed relationships with lots and lots of investors and accelerators and incubator programs and that kind of thing. So for me, I like to be very realistic with my founders and right, like value their own time, send them to places where they're more likely to achieve their goals. VC is not the realistic avenue for a lot of founders. And we know this from the statistics, right? You're just unlikely to get a check. It's not that people shouldn't, or it's not that it's not right for everyone, but knowing your odds of different capital sources is really important. So I don't see a lot of changes happening on the venture side. We do have a lot of emerging fund managers who have a different view of things, and a lot of them do realize the alpha potential of underestimated founders because it's been shown we deliver more per dollar invested than other groups do. So it actually is a profitable endeavor to invest in us. We are an undervalued asset class in the true term. But those emerging fund managers suffer from some of the same things that founders do, where it is difficult for them to get LPs. And when they do, they get smaller checks. So they're raising smaller funds and they can allocate smaller check sizes. And it's going to take generations to see a demonstrable change or increase in parity on the venture side of things. And there's reasons why. Venture capital is structured differently than other sources like angel investing, where an angel investor does not have limited partners, right? They're not managing someone else's money, which impacts a lot of decisions made on the venture side. Just their own money, right? I'm an angel investor. I just decide what I want to invest in. Right? It's my own money. And I'm really excited about angel investors as a capital class. They're much more diverse. There are over 4 million actively investing accredited investors in the US alone. It's a huge number and a huge amount of capital. And we are more likely to write checks to these overlooked founders. We are more likely to write checks to those that we identify with who somehow relate to us, right? And I'm very excited about that. The issue, of course, is fragmentation in a market that's enormous and they're everywhere. And so that's part of what we're working on as our platform solution is ways to consolidate and ways to group angels or help them find each other to pool capital in a way that's more curated than just joining a group or joining a syndicate.
I wish you all success in your angel endeavor. I think it's long overdue. Clearly there's been a lot of visibility in terms of DEI and greater equity. And obviously that spills over into the entrepreneurial space. One of the complaints I've heard is that it takes, and I'll talk about women because that's our focus here, it takes women founders more time, more meetings to get fewer dollars for a greater share of equity. Now, if I'm a founder, how do I go in and vet investors so that it doesn't look like they're generating a lot of activity by taking a lot of meetings and they feel good and I feel good, but there's no check at the end of it?
That one is such a thorny area. And there's no silver bullet answer, right? It can be a very, very stressful and sometimes traumatic experience to go through fundraising as an underrepresented founder and have that experience that you're just talking about. I can share with you, even with Scroobious, I ended up turning down a venture check because I just kept going meeting after meeting after meeting, taking so long. And for me, I decided I don't want that fund on my cap table. I don't think that's a good working relationship. And there was a check at the end of it, but often there's not, like you said, and it's a lot of stringing along. And women and founders of color are getting more meetings than we ever have before because it has entered the popular sphere, these statistics, and people are focused on DEI, but it's not translating to the dollars, like you said, which is just a waste of time. So there are questions that you can ask investors if you find yourself in that position to help validate. And this is part of that mindset of, I'm not a charity case. I'm not going to waste my own time. I'm offering you something. You can ask questions right off the bat, just like they ask you. You can say, would you mind sharing with me what were the dates of the last 3 investments that you made? Right? So you can know, are they recent? Or was it 2 years ago and you're not actually actively investing? And then, can you share with me what was the last opportunity you invested in that had a woman CEO? a founder of color or a Latinx founder or a veteran founder or, however you identify. And then you can get some facts about what are they actually investing in. So it's not just words. And that helps qualify your time if you know those things.
I was at an event recently where this is unfortunate, but I think it's a reality of where we live is there was a talk by a venture capitalist and he said, we're gender blind and we're color blind. If you come to us with a great business idea, we're going to fund it. I think we know that that's not true because of the numbers. Do you just run or do you try to do something to validate that you still have a chance because you have the world's greatest business idea?
Yeah, that one, I mean, again, it's auditory, so people can't see me rolling my eyes, but
I'll put an eye roll, big eye roll.
I know, my you get emojis most often used. It's just 100% eye roll. That's my most often used. But you hear people say that all the time. And when we talk about ways to remove bias from investing decisions, there's kind of two ends of a spectrum. Some people believe the real way to do that is you remove everything about the person and you only have the business metrics. And then they argue, then you can't be biased because you don't even know who the person is. You're just basing it on the business. The other end of it is put a lot about the person in there because people make decisions with, a human relationship element, and you have to make that forefront and really get it out there. And that's how you de-bias, is by creating these human relationships. I'm obviously on the human end of things, and there's a number of reasons, but one of the really scary parts about the end of the spectrum that says, hey, a good business is going to get funded, just show me the metrics and we don't care, that has bias baked into it. Founders who are not able to access networks or resources or have life responsibilities that other founders don't will not have the same growth metrics or the same growth or momentum signals a lot of the time that others do. I'll use myself as an example here. I talk to fund managers about this a lot. I say, hey, we're past the height of the pandemic now. You're comparing opportunities across your desk. I'm a mom and I had 2 school-aged kids, and I had to deliberately not do the fundraise I was planning on doing and deliberately way slow down the building of this company to make it work and make it viable. You're now comparing my year 3 metrics with single white guys that did nothing but focus on their business for the whole pandemic. That's not an indicator of potential return later on, but that's how it's being used. So if you're going to just take me out of it and put my opportunity straight up against someone else like that, no, it's full of bias. And it's almost worse, right? And the other end of it, there's a lot of investing decisions, even from funds who say that it is not a rational decision. A human is making that decision. There's so much signal that investors rely on in terms of whether they think you're confident, whether they like being in a room with you, whether you can command the room, who your network is. None of those are just quantified metrics of your business, but that's how decisions are made. That's part of what we're doing at Scroobious, is measuring and quantifying some of those intangibles and things about how people relate to other people, because that is the reality. And anyone who tells you that doesn't influence how they make investment decisions is either lying or not aware of their own behavior.
What I'm taking away, and maybe this is a bit hardened, is for the time being, just given that you have limited time and limited opportunities, you're probably better served going after the people who are committed to making that investment in some way and staying clear of those who either appear to not be aware of these biases or not committed to addressing them in any way and just looking at it from a pure financial perspective, just because that's how the industry has been run for the longest time.
Yeah, I mean, that's my best advice. And, again, I really speak to those who identify as underrepresented more than others. We work with everyone, right? True diversity is equal representation of everyone. So we don't exclude people. But if that's the primary audience, is you're saying, well, for people who historically have been challenged to raise, what's your best advice there? Best use of time. Portfolio speaks for itself. So if it's a fund, they often have their portfolio companies up on their websites. Do some research before you contact them or take a call from them. Who's in their portfolio? Is it all men and you're a woman? probably don't go to them. No, it's not don't go to VC, but be smart about it and have your eyes open to what realistically you're going to achieve. You're probably going to need a mix of VC and angels. Or maybe crowdfunding is the right thing for you. That comes with its own, issues. Maybe debt financing is the right thing for you. There's a lot of ways to get capital now that didn't exist before. And so everything should be considered. But if you really are looking at VC funds and, if they say big on their website, we care about DEI, we don't look at this stuff, we make decisions, and then you look at their portfolio and it's not diverse, well, that tells you something. You can do that research and make those decisions for yourself before you reach out to them. Don't just take the homepage for the words that they have on the homepage. Look at what they actually do. And then when it's angel investors, my best advice is to do some research. This is how I coach founders. I say, create an investor persona, just like you would a user persona. Who would just get it? Who would just get what you're doing? What type of experience do they have? Maybe it's something to do with demographics or geography. Usually it's, they've reached a certain level in their career in an industry, or you've seen them quoted somewhere. When you talk about what you do, their eyes would light up and they would just know what you were doing. That's who you want to go find. And that's a very good use of your time to go pitch those people.
Awesome. The hour has flown by, so I'm going to try to leave this with asking you, what's one thing that you wish women founders would know or do differently so they can significantly increase their chances of raising the capital they need?
I mean, it's kind of a summary of what we talked about, right? So a lot of it is just knowing the signals that investors look for. And there are some simple things you can do. And then there are the mental frameworks that need to change, right? So even a simple thing, like if you release any of this video, you'll see I've trained myself to stare directly in my webcam when I'm talking. It's different. If I'm looking at you, I know this is an auditory medium, but like when I look at you, when I look at my webcam, big difference. Eye contact is important because our human brains interpret direct eye contact as confidence. And confidence is a signal that investors rely upon heavily for a founder, right? And as women, we tend to avert our eyes when we feel uncomfortable or if we think someone knows better than us, which is the position we often find ourselves when we're pitching for money. It's uncomfortable a lot of the time. But when you avert your eyes, you're submissive and you're not perceived as confident as much as that other guy that walks in who isn't nearly as competent as you, but directs eye contact and uses a loud voice and makes direct statements. That person's seen as more confident. I mean, it sounds silly, but honestly, a lot of raising at my last company was I can do that in a room, and it's a signals things. So teaching yourself the signals that you can put out to portray that confidence and competence. And then being really realistic with your time, right? We don't have a lot of time. If you're a parent, you have negative time. And making smart decisions to not just go pitch everyone that will take a meeting with you. That's not the right use of your time. Just like we were talking about, do your research and understand where your odds are better than others or what the right source of capital is for you based on your goals and direct it there.
Awesome. Anything else that I should have asked but didn't?
No, this was a great conversation. I love the platform that you've built. I appreciate you inviting me on. And it's so important just to hear these different voices and hear from people who have been in the space and have these experiences so that all of your listeners, and particularly all the founders listening to this, know that there is a whole community out there of people that can relate to them and that they're not alone and things are achievable. You just have to educate yourself so that you're going into it with your eyes open.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Allison. This has been very eye-opening for me, and I'm sure it'll be for others as well. And for those of you listening, if you're a minority or any kind of underrepresented founder, I have heard personal testimonials from people who just by themselves came and told me how great Allison was and how great Scroobious was in helping them improve their pitch. So thank you so much, Allison. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
My conversation with Allison was quite a thrilling one for me. She brought a tremendous depth of experience and insight into the capital access problem that most of us women entrepreneurs don't have access to. My top 3 takeaways? First, you can significantly improve the caliber of your pitch by focusing on the why, not just blindly accepting the what of every activity and task in the whole fundraising process. By doing this, Not only will you find more creative ways of achieving the same goals, but you'll also boost your confidence and credibility when talking to investors. Second, own your value. Investors are awash with capital, and they need you to make that capital productive, and you're the opportunity for them to put that capital to work profitably. You're not charity. You're their ticket to what they're most hungry for, which is returns. And you do all the work. So, own your value. Third, just like you create an ideal customer profile, take time to also create an ideal investor profile. What kind of investor would light up when they hear about your venture? What's important to them? And where do they hang out? I'd never thought about creating this profile in the context of raising capital before, and it opened my eyes to new pathways and opportunities that I hadn't realized existed. So, what one learning can you apply to make your own fundraising more powerful going forward? Thanks for listening to today's episode. We have show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achieve.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe and share with a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go be an achiever.